Rise. We'll come to order.
You may be seated. All right, let the record reflect that the defendant is present along with counsel for the defendant, assistant state attorneys. Both sides ready to proceed?
Yes. Yes, Your Honor.
All right, let's return to jury. I get Steve Simon to do it versus.
Rise.
All rise for the answer.
You may be seated. State recognized person of the jury.
Yes, Your Honor.
Defense.
Yes, Your Honor.
And members of the jury, did you follow all of our previous instructions?
Yes.
You may continue.
Thank you. Dr. Mings, we were talking about the information that formed the basis of your opinion. And you were requested, were you not, by the party that hired you to go clarify items in your report this past Monday, correct?
Not exactly. I requested the opportunity to clarify a particular issue with him. It was me who instigated the request.
All right, and you instigated that request after the trial had begun, correct?
I believe so.
Right. And you knew at that time that Mr. Rodriguez had the opportunity to sit through at least 2 days' worth of testimony. Is that correct?
Probably.
Okay. Are you telling the jury that you had no opportunity after your deposition on October 22nd to go clarify the items that you needed to have clarified?
Specific issue. I mentioned briefly to counsel at one point in time that I may want to talk to him again. Quite frankly, I got other things I had to deal with, and I got ill in the past week, and I decided that eventually I need to talk to him. So I asked an opportunity to go speak to him before I testified.
Did you take into consideration the fact that he had sat through testimony and could therefore tailor whatever he told you at that point to what he had already heard from the witnesses?
I knew that was a possibility, yes.
You earlier referred to the utilization of jail records
Yes.
in forming your opinion.
Yes.
And what you explained to the jury was that these records don't show until much later on that Mr. Rodriguez was having any disturbance of thought, correct?
They show that he was not acknowledging these issues until I think it was approximately mid-December.
December 31st.
I don't
Right.
remember the date.
So you're talking about entries in the jail records from November 6th, 7th, 8th, 9th, 10th, all the way throughout December that read like denied auditory hallucinations, correct?
Correct.
Overt delusions were not elicited, correct?
Correct.
Words like no evidence of hallucination or psychosis, correct?
I believe so. I don't recall the exact details.
denied auditory, tactile, and visual hallucinations, correct?
Correct.
I mean, they take a daily record, at least Monday through Friday, of their observations and contact with him.
Yes,
Am I correct?
that's correct.
Thought process, logical and coherent. No noted or stated evidence of psychosis.
Correct.
And this is the day of the arrest and the days after and even the weeks after, despite his expressing those things to doctors hired by the defense to evaluate him, correct?
They were doctors. I don't know who retained them, whether they were court-ordered at that point or they were hired by the defense. There was 3 different ones, so I'm not sure.
Okay. Now, Mr. Rodriguez's stated amnesia begins when he starts firing, right?
Essentially, yes.
So you explored with him what he did at the building prior to his starting to shoot, correct?
He told me that he went to the building in order to do what I had described before, that he had gone in the building to do that, yes.
All right. You started with when he was at the post office, realized he didn't have the check, so no money, can't get into school because of no money, decides to go to RS&H because, in his words, they were finagling with the numbers. Is that an accurate recitation?
That was part of what he told me. The other part had to do with Rafael Velasquez.
All right, that he went to RS&H to talk to Rafael Velasquez about the brain hacking.
Correct.
Did he find Rafael Velasquez?
Not to my knowledge.
Was Rafael Velasquez there?
I believe that in his statement he said that he was there, but he did not come face-to-face with Mr. Rodriguez.
Where was he?
I don't know. Somewhere else in the building.
Somewhere else in the building?
I
Somewhere
guess.
else on the floor?
I don't know.
Hiding under his desk? Hiding behind a file cabinet?
I presume he was hiding. I don't recall the details of where he was.
Okay. Did you see any testimony anywhere that Mr. Rodriguez made any effort to confront Rafael Velasquez that day at RS&H?
I don't know.
Now, you skipped a period of time from when he's at the post office until he starts shooting.
Mhm.
What happened between those 2 points?
What he told me is that he went to RS&H for the reasons that we just discussed, drove there, and then went into the building and entered the door and started shooting.
Did he tell you that he went from his car right to the front door of RS&H?
I don't believe he delineated to me exactly how he got in the building.
Did you ask?
I did not ask. I presume that's how he got in the building at the time.
Okay, so you filled in a gap with a presumption.
I believe that's probably accurate.
Okay. Did you know that he spent 6.5 minutes in the parking garage?
I knew that when I looked at the surveillance video later, it appears that there was some period of time before he got in there, yes.
When did you look at that surveillance video, by the way?
When it was given to me sometime in the past last week or somewhere around there, I don't remember exactly when. It was after, I believe it was after our deposition.
Right. But it was before you went out on Monday and talked to Mr. Rodriguez, I imagine, from what you've just said.
Yes.
Okay, so you look at the video. Do you realize that he didn't go directly there?
I'm
When you
not
look
sure
at the
that I
video?
realized. I'm not sure that I realized how long a period of time it was that he was in the parking garage.
Okay. So
The video was
you
not.
didn't ask it. So you didn't ask him about it because you didn't realize it.
That's probably
Correct?
accurate. That's probably accurate. Yeah.
Okay. Did you realize that he took a certain path through the floor while he was shooting?
I presume he took a path through the floor. I don't know what it was.
Did you realize that he took a certain path, a path described by witnesses?
I don't know what path he took.
Okay. So you didn't have an opportunity to ask him about what path he might have taken or to respond in any way to at least the witness statements about where he went, who he was looking for, why he shot into certain cubicles, why he took certain action,
He told me he did not remember any of it. So.
and you didn't press him?
No, I asked him repeatedly what he could remember, and he told me that he didn't.
I don't have any other questions of Dr. Mings, Your Honor.
Redirect.
Dr. Mings, the specific witness statements that you had referred to earlier from Maureen Daly, Rafael Velazquez, etc., did you have those statements available to you prior to actually writing your report?
Definitely. And I reviewed them prior to writing my report.
Okay. And so then the summary that you relied more heavily upon also summarized those witness statements.
Basically what happened, right.
Okay. And you mentioned that you only had specific questions that you wanted to ask Mr. Rodriguez again when you went back out on Monday, the 11th
That's correct.
of this past week. What were those two questions that you wanted to specifically ask him?
I wanted to clarify with him how long he had had the concealed weapons permit, and I wanted to clarify with him how long he had had the concealed weapons permit, what was his understanding of where he was allowed to carry the gun, and I wanted to clarify with him that day where he did carry the gun.
And did you receive answers to those questions?
Yes, I did.
Did it change your opinion in any way from the report and the opinion you'd already issued?
No, it didn't change my opinion.
On cross-exam, you were also asked about the records from the Orange County Jail that you reviewed from the day that Mr. Rodriguez was placed in custody in the jail through December. The state pointed out that they report that the defendant was denying hallucinations, auditory, tactile. His thought process was logical and coherent. They saw no signs of psychosis. Is this something that's common in a paranoid schizophrenic? Once they've had this psychotic episode, this amnesia of an event like a shooting, are they going to, from that point forward, remain psychotic and delusional? And
Your Honor, I'm going to object to her asking him about other individuals aside from Mr. Rodriguez. Is it relevant?
Response.
I would say that the witness has been qualified as an expert in the field of forensic psychology, and so he is allowed to give his opinion as to his experience in this field and what he knows about paranoid schizophrenia as it relates to forensic psychology.
Overruled.
My experience with many people with paranoid schizophrenic conditions is that they are very reluctant to tell you about their paranoid delusions unless they would trust you. As I mentioned, when I used to work in FETC in Gainesville, we would have people who were sent up there as incompetent to proceed with this condition, and I can remember several occasions where I would see them initially and they would deny that there was anything. First of all, let me back up. Schizophrenia is well known for a lack of insight into having mental illness. It is a fundamental quality of schizophrenia, which is part of the typical symptom pattern. Okay? They generally don't know they're mentally ill. They don't believe they're mentally ill. Paranoid schizophrenics tend to be very defensive if they are relatively high functioning like him, and may not tell you anything about what's going on inside their head for a long time if they do.
And you had also indicated that one of your current jobs is to review records from the Orange County Jail. Is that
Yeah,
correct?
once a year, I have a contract to do quality assurance mental health records at the jail to look and make sure that they're meeting the criteria they're supposed to for accreditation for their chief psychologist that just started this year.
So you see lots of Orange County jail records,
I see
specifically with mental health.
Yeah, I see lots of Orange County jail records every week because I do a lot of evaluations, and whenever possible, I try to look at the jail medical records. So I'm in their medical records department quite often.
Would you say that the majority of jail records are saying that the inmate patient is revealing things to the doctors who are on the staff of the jail?
Object to the relevance.
Sustain.
You said on cross you were being asked about the approximately 6.5 minutes that Mr. Rodriguez would have spent in the parking garage before entering the building itself to RS&H. And you said that you realized he didn't go in immediately. Does the amount of time that he spent in the parking garage make a difference to your opinion?
Not that I can see.
Were there other statements, anything that revealed something that would change your opinion? Anything that was of concern to you?
There's nothing I've subsequently seen or learned about that changes my opinion.
No further questions.
Any recross on those issues?
No, Your Honor.
May the doctor be excused.
Yes, sir.
Thank you, Dr. Bings.
Thank
may
you.
be excused, sir. The defense may call their next witness.
Dr. Gregory Pritchard.
Please raise your right hand.
You solemnly swear the testimony you give shall be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God.
Yes, I do.
You may proceed.
Thank you. Could you please state your name and spell your last name for the record?
My name is Dr. Gregory, Gregory. Last name is Pritchard, Prichard.
And currently, where do you reside?
I reside in Bristol, Florida, which is up near Tallahassee.
And do you have a practice there?
I do.
And what is your area of focus?
I'm a licensed clinical psychologist in the state of Florida, and I do forensic work. Forensic work meaning I try to address questions that the court has that has a psychological aspect to it. So that's what forensic psychologists do.
Do you do any other work other than for court evaluations?
Not much other work. I do primarily forensic work. Sometimes I do risk assessments that are not for the court necessarily. They might be for families or whatever, substance abuse assessments, things like that. But about 95% or more of what I do is forensic related, so I'm trying to answer a question for the court.
And within the forensic, do you do different type? Sanity, competency, sexual predator reports?
Yes, under the umbrella of doing forensic work, I do competency assessments. That's often a question the court will have. Is a person competent to proceed in a criminal matter? Sanity assessments, is the person sane or not when the offense occurred? I do psychosexual risk assessments. I've been contracted with the state of Florida since 1999 to do risk assessments for the state's sexual predators or alleged sexual predators. So I do those evaluations and often end up in court on those. I do assessments to determine if a person is a suicide risk and needs to be committed to a hospital for treatment. I do substance abuse assessments to see if a person needs to be committed or put in a residential facility for substance abuse treatment. I do diagnostic assessments where the question is, what's going on with this person? Does he have a mental illness? So I do diagnostic assessments.
Could you give us your educational background, please?
Sure. I went to University of Florida, and I graduated from there with a bachelor's degree in psychology in 1988. I then did my graduate work at Forest Institute of Psychology in Huntsville, Alabama, received my master's degree from there in 1992 in clinical psychology. I completed my coursework there in 1993. Following completion of the coursework, the requirement in the state of Florida is a internship. I did my internship at a forensic hospital in Chattahoochee, Florida. So after my internship was complete, I graduated with my doctoral degree, magna cum laude, out of Forest Institute of Professional Psychology. The hospital retained me following my internship. I worked at a dual diagnosis unit at the hospital for individuals who had both a diagnosis of mental retardation and mental illness. I was the behavioral department head there for about 3 years. I then transferred to a civil admission unit at Florida State Hospital in Chattahoochee, and that hospital, or that unit, treats individuals who are committed to the hospital because they have mental illness, and the goal is to rehabilitate them and get them back to the community. I was there for about 3 years and was a senior psychologist on that unit, and then I transferred to a forensic admission hospital, a forensic admission unit at Florida State Hospital in Chattahoochee, where the hospital would receive individuals who are committed by courts statewide in Florida as either incompetent to proceed or not guilty by reason of insanity. And our objective was to restore people to competence who were incompetent, and to rehabilitate those individuals who were not guilty by reason of insanity and try to get them in a less restrictive environment than the hospital, which is the most restrictive environment. During that 7-year period that I was at Florida State Hospital in Chattahoochee, I had a 1-day-a-week private practice, and in that 1-day-a-week private practice, I did forensic assessments for the courts. I do a lot of work with mentally retarded defendants to determine if they're competent or not, sanity assessments, competency assessments. That 1-day-a-week private practice turned into full-time private practice in 2001 when I resigned from the hospital, and I've been in full-time forensic private practice since 2001, so about 12 years.
Thank you. About how many sanity evaluations do you complete a year?
The most common issue is competency, and the second most common issue that results in a referral to my office is sanity. So I will probably do 75 to 100 per year.
And for how many years have you been doing those?
I've been doing them for about 16. I've been doing sanity assessments for about 16, but in full-time private practice for about 12.
Okay. And have you ever testified as an expert in court before?
Yes.
How many times?
Hundreds of times.
In Florida?
Yes.
In the Ninth Circuit?
Yes.
Right. At this time, I ask that Dr. Pritchard be allowed to be accepted as an expert in the area of forensic psychology and give his opinion as such.
What says the state? Okay, Dr. Pritchard would be accepted as an expert witness in the area of forensic psychology. You may continue.
Thank you. Dr. Pritchard, were you court appointed in this case
Yes.
for the purpose of evaluating Mr. Rodriguez for sanity?
Correct.
What does court appointed mean?
Sustain.
Can you tell us how, is there a list that you have to get on to be a court appointed expert?
You have to have certain qualifications to be a court-appointed.
And is one of those qualifications?
Certain qualifications to be a court-appointed expert, yes.
And is one of those qualifications taking a course provided by state of Florida for forensic evaluators.
Yes.
And who teaches that course?
Dr. Randy Otto, he's a professor at University of South Florida.
And when was the last time you took that course?
Within the last month.
Okay. Now, do you know how many times you met with Mr. Rodriguez?
I met with him 3 times. I met with him November 30th of 2012, January 11th of 2013, and September 22nd of 2013.
And do you remember where you met with him at?
North Florida Evaluation and Treatment Center, which is in Gainesville, Florida.
Okay. And is the Mr. Rodriguez we're talking about in the courtroom today?
Yes, he is.
Could you please describe where he is and what he's wearing?
He's the gentleman sitting at this table in the white shirt.
Okay. Can the record reflect that he's identified Mr. Rodriguez?
The record was indicated.
Thank you. Now, do you know overall how much time you spent with each 3 visits examining Mr. Rodriguez for sanity purposes?
Probably about 2 to 2.5 hours per visit, so it would have been about 7 to 8 hours, I would say.
And did you have any items to review in this case before you went to speak with him?
I did have some, yes.
Do you know what those were?
Yes, I had evaluations by Dr. Hall. I had evaluation by Dr. Tressler, Dr. Burns, Dr. Danzinger. I had evaluations from North Florida Evaluation and Treatment Center, where he had been residing since January of 2010. They submitted a number of reports to the court. So I had at least 5 of their clinical evaluations. I also had police reports, supplemental report authored by Officer Vernon about the incident in question. I reviewed all of the clinical charts at North Florida Evaluation and Treatment Center while I was there. See if I had anything else initially. I think that's all I had initially.
And did you have an opportunity to speak with anyone regarding sanity issues in this case?
I did speak with Mr. Rodriguez's mother, Anna Rodriguez. I also attempted to contact Officer Vernon, but I did not hear back from his office.
Okay. Now, when you're a court-appointed expert to do these evaluations, do you go out and get your own material and request all kinds of documents yourself from different agencies?
It really depends. There's no absolute in that issue. I mean, when you do a sanity assessment, ordinarily the offices of the state attorney and public defender will provide documents. Typically, documents are provided that each office believes is relevant to the question at hand. If I come across something in my subsequent evaluation that I did not receive that I think may be relevant, I will request that information. For example, in this case, I thought it would be very relevant to have the jail medical psychiatric records regarding Mr. Rodriguez after his booking on November 6th of 2007. So I was not provided with that information, requested it from your office, and you provided it to me. So that's kind of the way it goes, is we have the information typically that each office believes is relevant. If there's other information referenced at some place in the documents that I have that I think might be relevant and I do not have, I will request that information.
Okay. Other than the jail records in this case, did you request any other items?
I requested jail records, and I knew that he had been Baker acted, so I requested any psychiatric records or reports that may be available for review. I was also provided with some emails. I didn't request them because I didn't know they existed, but I was provided with some emails as well.
Okay. I want to talk to you. You said you relied on a report that was authored by Detective Vernon. Is that what you just said?
Yes.
And how long is that report? Do you have any pages?
It's 26 pages. It's a supplement that was a synopsis of the event, synopsis of Orlando Police Department's interview of witnesses, synopsis of the general investigation, so it was lengthy.
And does it give an overall theory by the police as to what happened that day?
Generally, yes. I think it does.
And does it give quotes from various witnesses who were in the building that day?
Yes.
Does it give a detailed description of a surveillance video?
Yes.
And does it describe times and where people are going in this surveillance video?
Yes, it does.
And does it include direct statements from James Beverly?
James Beverly, Mr. Force, Mr. Velasquez, other witnesses, Daly, Miss Daly, who was a receptionist, Mr. Beckworth, and several others. So yes, direct statements from many of the witnesses, many of the people involved.
Okay. I want to talk to you about Sanity in Florida. Since you are a court-appointed expert to do an evaluation for Sanity, what is the test that you're looking for Florida?
It's basically, it's called McNaughton. McNaughton is essentially two-pronged. McNaughton says that does the person suffer from a mental disease, infirmity, or defect? And if so, because of that infirmity, disease, or defect, he didn't understand what he was doing or its consequences, or if he did understand what he was doing and its consequences, he didn't appreciate that the conduct was wrong. That's McNaughton. That's the standard.
So in this case, did you come to a conclusion on the first prong of does Mr. Rodriguez have a mental disease, defect, illness, infirmity?
Yes, I did.
And what is that?
My opinion is that he does clearly have a mental disease, infirmity, or defect, and in my review of the information that I had, my analysis of the information I had, it appears to me from a clinical standpoint that before his termination from RS&H in June of 2007, there was statements from people he was employed with that indicated to me there was psychosis. He was misperceiving his environment. And what goes along with that essentially is the Baker Act. He was Baker Acted, which means he was involuntarily committed to a facility for psychiatric care in June of 2007, which is the same month he was terminated from RS&H. So there's clear indication that he became ill substantially. There's indication he was treated way back in 2003 and 2004 for a mental disease, infirmity, or defect. It seems to me in my analysis of information that it became extremely prominent in 2007, and there's indication that since 2007, prominently in 2008 and 2009, up until June of 2009, August of 2008 until June of 2009, there's some well-chronicled information about his psychosis being very active. Less information that's documented between June of 2009 and the shooting in November of 2009. Got a lot of information from his mother that clearly represented to me that his psychosis was active. Jail records after his booking beginning in November 6th of 2009 indicated that psychosis seemed evident. He was misperceiving still, and for a long time after that when he was committed to North Florida Evaluation and Treatment Center.
I didn't hear you. I did not hear you.
It's an objection as to the relevance of the final statement.
Oh, really?
So for me, there was clear indication that the first prong was mental disease, infirmity, or defect, schizophrenia. It's a psychotic mental illness. Clear documentation that was present for a long time for Mr. Rodriguez. beginning again prominently in 2007 and up until a long time after the event occurred.
And in your review, in looking back, does the mental illness seem to be getting worse?
I think that for me there was indication that before the shooting at RS&H, he was employed at some places. He was employed at Subway for about a year. He was employed at Orange County Public Works. It sounds to me as if those employment positions didn't work out in part because of his mental illness, but his capacity to at least hold a job for a period of time suggested that there was some ability to compose himself and be appropriate to work some hours in front of other people, and the other people did not recognize him as needing to be terminated, needing to be hospitalized. However, there were other times during that same period where he was extremely psychotic, floridly psychotic, where the verbalizations clearly demonstrated that he was very paranoid, very delusional. So the long answer to that is, as mental illnesses go, typically there's not a linear progression or a linear worsening of symptoms over the course of time. Symptoms will be worse and better according to the kind of psychopharmacological, according to the kind of medications the person is ingesting, according to what kind of stress the person is under. So things will vary. So I would say beginning in 2007 until now, his mental illness has been the worst it's been in his life. But in that span, there's been periods of relative stability and periods of pretty extreme psychosis.
So it's common that it will go kind of up and down.
It will. It's a lot of variables play into the manifestation of symptoms, and it will go up and down over the course of time.
What were some of the symptoms that were important to you in reaching your diagnosis of paranoid schizophrenia?
Well, I mean, prominently and specific to this case is the symptom of delusions. A delusion is a fixed false belief that is untrue. It's psychotic. So the person is misperceiving environmental events, misperceiving his environment, the motives of other people, and it's fixed. You can't present him with information and tell him, because of this, I can show you this is not true. That's just not rational. In somebody who has a delusional system, they absolutely believe it is true, and you can't convince them otherwise. That's the nature of a delusion. So in his case, I think delusion was the most prominent symptom. There was indication that he was delusional about specific individuals, including Mr. Velazquez, which was one of the employers at RS&H, with whom Mr. Rodriguez had worked at another engineering firm. There's indication that the delusions, he in part blamed Mr. Velazquez for the emergence of the delusional system, believing that things occurred that didn't actually occur, and believing he was being persecuted by Mr. Velazquez, believing that he was being persecuted by others. So it was kind of a conspiratorial thing. Everywhere he went, there was people who were trying to persecute him. And what makes this clearly irrational and clearly delusional is once he was terminated from RS&H in June of 2007, he had no contact with the RS&H people, not with Mr. Velazquez, not with the other people there. And his perception was that when he went to work for Orange County and when he went to work for Subway, they were still involved in persecuting him, when in fact they had no contact with him whatsoever. So that was the prominent thing. It was a delusional framework that was very intricate. It was very involved. It was centered around RS&H and members of RS&H, including Mr. Velazquez, other individuals there. So that was the most prominent symptom. I would say secondarily, some hallucinations, in other words, hearing voices, perceiving that he was being communicated to by, in his case, somebody named Sharptooth, that there was this capacity of electronic surveillance, that he had been zapped, and that was his term, zapped, and they could monitor his thinking, they could steal his thoughts, they could send him messages subliminally and electronically and otherwise. So there was an element of hallucinations where he was hearing voices like Sharptooth, and for me that was less prominent. So I would say that those were the prominent symptoms. Now, tethered to those symptoms are insight and judgment problems. When you're misperceiving your environment and you think these things are happening and nobody can convince you otherwise, then your insight and judgment is impaired, consistent with the misperceiving. And so that was a prominent thing for him. His judgment and insight was very poor because he was misperceiving what was occurring in his environment.
Now, is this common in people with schizophrenia?
Yes, it is. It's a requirement of the diagnosis is that there's some kind of psychosis, and the psychosis is either delusions or hallucinations, and those delusions and hallucinations cause impairment in people's functioning, judgment, employment, social impairment, things like that. So yes, it is a requirement of the diagnosis.
Okay. Now, I would like to talk about the second prong of sanity. We talked about the mental illness, and then the second prong is an or type question. And from the second one, what is your opinion on part two?
It is an or. It's a two-part portion in McNaughton, and that is did not know what he was doing or its consequences. That's not the or connection. Did not know what he was doing or its consequences, or if he knew what he was doing and the consequences, he did not appreciate that the conduct was wrong. So my opinion is he did know what he was doing and its consequences. In other words, he knew that firing a gun at people would result in injury and death. So I do not think he satisfies that portion. The other side of the or, however, is did not appreciate the conduct was wrong. I believe that he did not appreciate the conduct was wrong. And essentially, it's because of, and that's a requirement of McNaughton, because of the mental infirmity, disease, or defect. So in other words, he's misperceiving. He's perceiving that he is being persecuted, and in some instances communicates that he's being brain hacked, his life is in danger, my family's life is in danger. All of these elements are that he was perceiving persecution to the point of possibly being killed and his family possibly being killed or harmed. And because he felt like Velasquez and other members of RSNH were responsible for this persecution, he felt like he was eliminating a threat to his family and his being. And that's the nature of the sanity issue. He responded in a manner suggesting that he was acting against the persecution that was destroying him and his family.
Now, when you're looking at the second prong specifically of sanity, what is the most important consideration as a doctor that you have in making your decision?
Well, the most important consideration is the language in McNaughton, and essentially for me it would be, was he functioning, was he operating and behaving consistent with a psychotic experience? Was his behavior, obviously to the rest of us it was very wrong, but was his behavior at the time of the event because he had a mental health symptom that was driving that behavior? And one way to look at it is, if the delusional experience for him was true, okay, if he was being persecuted by RS&H and they were trying to destroy his livelihood and destroy his life, would it justify the behavior that occurred? So that's part of what we look at clinically. So the issue becomes, is it justified that he kills people when he's perceiving that these people are trying to kill him and his family? So that's essentially the bottom line in the whole analysis.
And as far as your particular opinion that he did not know what he was doing was wrong, what factors in this case played a part into that?
I mean, it was the expression from Mr. Rodriguez beginning in 2007 with the RS&H employees. There was a description by Mr. Velasquez about mentally he was deteriorating during his employment with RS&H. There was description by Mr. Velasquez that before he was terminated by RS&H, that he was carrying around a purse that had documents that the federal government might want to come and get soon, so he carried them everywhere that he went, including the bathroom. Mr. Velasquez thought this was unusual and strange, and it is unusual and strange, and it suggests to me that that's when his delusional system began. Correspondence after he left, I mean, he also talked to one of the individuals, Forrest, when he was fired. He left a note for Forrest, which was a supervisor there, indicating that he felt Forrest was trying to steal his ideas, essentially. The innuendo was that Forrest was trying to steal his ideas. Forrest had no idea what he was talking about. So, again, there's indication that there is perceived persecution. Rodriguez is perceiving persecution from individuals at RS&H, and you know, identifying specific individuals in RS&H that are doing this from the time of his termination. Following that, there's indication that he's trying to contact people like the FBI, like the Federal Communication Commission, telling these people.
Objection to content.
Approach. Objection sustained. You may continue.
Thank you. May I approach the witness? I'd like to show
Yes.
him. Thank you. I'd like to show you what's been marked as State Exhibit 12. Just take a look at this.
Yes.
And is that the note you were just telling us about?
Yes.
That he left on a door that had some odd, strange messaging on it?
It had strange messaging, and it had a red thumbprint that was Mr. Rodriguez's thumbprint.
Is that on the back?
Yes.
Okay. And, I'm sorry, what was the significance of that?
Well, again, that's one element of the clinical indication that he's misperceiving, that he believes Mr. Forrest is trying to steal proprietary information. And again, Mr. Forrest has no idea what Mr. Rodriguez is talking about. Mr. Forrest would say that he later learned that Mr. Rodriguez may have submitted something for technical review, but again, Mr. Forrest had nothing to do with this at all. So there's indication that the misperceiving was occurring based on what Mr. Force said, based on what Mr. Velasquez said about Mr. Rodriguez's peculiar behavior. There's indication that he began misperceiving then. And again, he was Baker Acted because he was telling the Baker Act facility in June of 2007 that he felt his identity had been stolen, and the FBI was investigating this. A lot of psychotic ramblings then, psychotic ramblings meaning he was misperceiving. He was thinking there was persecution when there actually wasn't. I would say another prominent issue is the indication from my interview with his mother about events between July of 2009 and November of 2009. Very interesting things. And for me, one of the issues that has to be sorted out is often family members are not the most credible because they have a lot of at stake when they talk to mental health individuals. They love the defendant, the family member, and they want things to go well for them. So often you don't get objective information. That's been my experience over the course of time. So sometimes I don't even talk to family members. But when I do, I have to sort things out about whether I think it seems to be a credible piece of information coming from the family member. In the case of talking to his mother, I did believe it was very credible because I felt like the information she was providing, she didn't really know she was providing information specific to his mental illness, but she was. She was describing that he was looking for what he thought was GPS devices and fiber optics in their apartment. He would put holes in the roof and in the walls and look for these things. He would say that he hears people talking about him, and she would try to explain to him, nobody lives above us. It can't be possible. And of course, it's a delusion. It's a fixed false belief. So you can't tell a person with a delusion that it isn't true. They're not going to believe you. They believe the delusion. That's the nature of a delusional system. Taking some material out of his car, like the lining out of his car, looking for fiber optics and GPS monitoring devices, driving too fast in his car because he felt like he was being followed, being watched. This is an interesting thing. He would put headphones on. He would play music very loud and put headphones on. This is a great example of her providing information that she didn't understand was a mental illness, was a function or manifestation of a mental illness. Turn music on very loud and put the headphones on, but the headphones weren't attached to the stereo. So this is seen a lot in mentally ill individuals when they're trying to drown out the delusions or the voices. What they will do is they will either play music very loud, it's very common, or they will put something in their ear, thinking that if they put stuff in their ear, then they're not going to hear the voices anymore. Some individuals with schizophrenia will stuff Kleenex in their ear. I've seen people with schizophrenia put sticks in their ears, trying to get the voices to not come in. And what she's describing to me was indication that Mr. Rodriguez was trying to drown out the voices, not let them in. So that is, it's prominent. It's prominent indication that he's misperceiving. He thinks he's being persecuted. People are monitoring his house. People are monitoring when he's driving and he's trying to get away from them. People are putting things in his car trying to get away from them. He mentions to his mother that they're sending him pictures with superimposed images of genitals over the pictures of him. So he believes they're doing this to harass him. So, those are the strong indication between July of 2009 and November of 2009 that the delusions that he was suffering from, they were alive and well. They were very prominent. The other part of that would be the treatment at the jail once he's arrested on November 6th. I requested that information because obviously it's relevant when he gets to jail. Is he seen by mental health? Does he get treatment there? really interesting information and relevant to this issue. He's generally described as guarded. What that means, when you say guarded, a clinical person says guarded, what you're saying is he's not really telling you much. He's guarding what he's experiencing. They even make reference within 5 days of the shooting that he does not appear willing to elaborate on his internal workings or his internal dialogue. By 2 weeks from the incident, they describe him as having a flight of ideas. A flight of ideas is a psychotic experience. Within about a month, they're talking about him demonstrating paranoia, persecution, people following him. So these are the prominent issues. You know, even at the time of his arrest, when he speaks to officers, he says things, it's subtle, but he says things like, this will all work itself out. This will all work itself out. Probably not from a realistic perspective, so how rational is it? It just, for me, clinically, it smacks of misperceiving what's going on. This is all going to work itself out. I'd like to talk to the media because I want them to know what happened. RSNH people know why I did it. They know why I did it. Of course, nobody had contact with me at RSNH for 2 years. So there's clear indication right around the time of the event, in the months and even year preceding the event, in the months, weeks, years after the event, that delusional information was the driving force for Mr. Rodriguez in a lot of what he did, and a lot of the behaviors, including the behavior at RSNH.
And on the day of the shooting, November 6th of 2009, what is your understanding of the sequence of events that happened that day?
My understanding of the sequence of events was he went to post office to try to get, he thought expected his unemployment check. His unemployment check was not there. He left some mail at the post office on the counter that the postmaster would later return to his box. He then went to school, and he tried to register in college and could not register in college because he owed back tuition, so they wouldn't let him register until he paid his tuition bill. He left from there and went straight to RSH, arrived at RSH in the parking lot something like 11:33 a.m., ultimately went to a elevator, and it sounds like he went maybe from the parking garage to the first floor, and then couldn't do what he maybe wanted to do, which is get to RSNH, which is on the 8th floor. So ultimately, by about 11:40, he had made it to the 8th floor. The first victim, I think, exited RSNH at about 11:43. He seemed to be there for something like 6 minutes, 11:49 or so. The video indicated he was leaving. He would go straight home to his apartment where his mother, he lived with his mother, and his mother would leave at that point, and SWAT team would show up not too long after that, and Mr. Rodriguez would come to the window, put his hands up, follow SWAT team's commands, make a couple of comments to SWAT team, and then be taken into custody.
What is the significance of the way Mr. Rodriguez left the main building at RSNH?
You know, for me, there is no significance to that necessarily. I mean, what I can't do and what nobody can do is say exactly what he was thinking at those moments. You know, if he had made some verbalizations, maybe I could make some judgments about what was going through his mind, but I can't provide any kind of commentary in an expert way about the significance of that behavior there, specifically how he got in the building, how he left the building.
So as far as you just made a comment that you can't tell us what he was thinking at the time. At the time of what?
At the time of getting into the building, at the time of the shooting, I can't know exactly what he was thinking. I can draw inferences from other information, but when he was in the building and shooting people, I can't know exactly what he was thinking.
So if you can't know exactly what he was thinking, how can we have a discussion about whether he knew it was wrong at the time?
Well, I mean, that's the trick. It's not easy. It's not easy. Some cases are easy because people will make verbalizations while the offense is going on that will clearly demonstrate to people like myself, mental health experts, what they were likely thinking. But in cases where they don't, it has to be an inference. It has to be an inference based on the information that leads up to that event, based on the information that happens post-event. We have to draw inferences about, number one, was there infirmity, disease, or defect present? Number two, did it appear that he understood the nature and consequences of his actions, or if he did understand that, whether the actions were wrong. So we're drawing inferences based on witness statements from around the time, based on mental health statements from the people who treated him shortly after his arrest, from his mother, who spent a lot of time with him up until the time of the event. Just whatever source provides information about the kinds of things he was thinking and what may have been the motive for what he did.
So is it your ultimate conclusion that Mr. Rodriguez would meet the criteria for insanity at the time of the offense?
Yes, I think what compelled him was a delusional system that was, he believed he was being persecuted constantly on his employment at the Orange County Public Works after leaving RSNH. RSNH was somehow responsible for that. Harassed and persecuted at Subway, harassed and persecuted through emails, harassed and persecuted because he couldn't get an unemployment check because they were changing numbers and switching numbers. And again, the reality is that RSNH had nothing to do with those things. That's the misperception. The misperception is they were persecuting me. The reality was they had absolutely nothing to do with Mr. Rodriguez and probably hadn't thought about him much since he was terminated from his employment position in June of 2007.
Thank you.
Will our attorneys approach the bench, please? Okay, ladies and gentlemen of the jury, we're going to recess for lunch now. I'm going to ask that you return back here at 1:25 so we can get started promptly at 1:30 with the cross-examination of Dr. Pritchett. Again, please remember all of my previous instructions. Do not watch, read, or listen to any news accounts. Do not discuss this case among yourselves nor with anyone else. If you should happen to see the attorneys during the break and they don't look at you, they don't appear to be friendly, don't take it as a personal affront. They are not allowed to communicate with you in any fashion. and do not use any electronic devices to attempt to find anything out about this case. Return at 1:25 so we can start promptly at 1:30. Any additional instructions on behalf of the state
No, Your Honor.
or the defense?
No, Your Honor.
Thank you.
Jury up, please.
Be seated. All right, we're in recess. You have to call them and tell them to warm it up a little bit.